In this interview, I'm going to be speaking with Brigadier Brian Parritt, who's had a long-standing career in the military, including the Intelligence Corps, and he eventually became Director of the Intelligence Corps for 5 years. And today we're going to be sharing the secrets of his career in intelligence for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. Brigadier, it's wonderful. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today and to understand something about your journey and your intelligence career. So thank you for this today. So where did it all begin for you? How did you become involved in the Intelligence Corps?
Well, I think it began because after serving in the Royal Artillery in Korea, I felt, and not having gone to Sandhurst and not gone to a university, I always hankered after a university experience. And the way you could do that in the army was to do a long language course. So I originally applied for Japanese, I think, but the message was that we're not going to go to war with Japan, so how about Chinese? So I was selected to do the 3-year course learning Mandarin, which was 1 year in SOAS and then 2 years in Hong Kong University. And after that qualification, I was employed in a plainclothes job in Hong Kong, and I found it intriguing. And just at that time, which would be 56, 57, the Intelligence Corps became open for 100 regular officers. And so I applied to transfer from the Royal Artillery into the Intelligence Corps.
And when you think about your role and your career, were there any moments which were particularly memorable for good reasons or for bad reasons? I mean, stuff that you're allowed to talk about?
I think that the beauty of the Intelligence Corps and for an intelligence officer is to be when there are operations. If they're not operations, an intelligence officer really is a waste of rations. He can speculate about what might happen. It's if you do an intelligence tour where there are operations, where twice I was able, when you're briefing every morning to the general and you're standing there having to say what's going on, then that makes it a really worthwhile experience to be an Intelligence Corps officer.
And of course, in your time, in your career in the Intelligence Corps, it became more professionalised, didn't it? Have I understood that correctly in its history?
Indeed, and that was really the development of the Intelligence Corps. Up to the 57 time, the Intelligence Corps was a loose grouping commanded mainly by officers of any other arm. Right. And the officers, none of the officers went to the shop or Sandhurst. They were generally utilised by the army because they didn't fit in. I mean, if they were proper guys, they would go to county regiments or the cavalry or the artillery or the sappers. But if guys had this peculiar attribute of language or local knowledge, the army felt they were better employed in an intelligence corps rather than in a normal battalion or regiment. And so through the Second World War, through the First World War as well, the army recruited a lot of people who did extremely brave things, extremely clever people, making a massive contribution, whether it was in SIGINT, photographic intelligence, dropping in behind enemy lines, or straight analysis, or interrogation, or counter-security. They did all those range of things, but they were not regarded as a proper officers in the perception of the army. And it wasn't really till after Malaya and Kenya and Cyprus, but particularly Malaya, the DMI, General Davidson, felt that the attributes of the soldiers were so precious with their experience of all these skills that there had to be a proper organised officer cadre to manage them and direct them. And so it was on the backs really of the soldiers that the Intelligence Corps structure came into being. And so he issued this most important thing in our history to say that 100 regular officers could transfer to form the permanent cadre of the Intelligence Corps.
And so now it's possible for someone to join the Intelligence Corps direct without coming through any of the other...
That's great. It's still open to transferees, and we get some high-class transferees. But the slightly embarrassing thing was that when the selection was made for the regular Intelligence Corps officers, they only took up the 100, I think it was 4 officers who wore our cap badge during the war. And you can imagine that caused a bit of friction from the guys who'd been in Burma and all around the world in the Corps, but then were not accepted because they were not perceived to, in the spirit of the time, to be the right calibre for regular officers. A great pity. But it started slowly because all these officers came in from other arms with their own concepts of what the Intelligence Corps should or shouldn't do. I think only 2 of them had intelligence appointments before. And so it was a mixed up period to try and get a sense of unity.
And historically, I suppose also the training has been sometimes haphazard. I've noticed that in my own research, that there hadn't been a formalised intelligence training, particularly in the early days. Is that something which you've discovered yourself?
Yes, the intelligence training was always all arms. So you attended courses where battalion IOs or intelligence officers were doing courses. The soldiers were different. They did courses specifically for intelligence acquisition and handling and map marking and collation and so on. But for the officers, it took some time before we even had a basic training officers course where people came in and were given a specific course for the young officers. It was all a footsteps in the snow development with a general reluctance on behalf of the army still for a long, long time to accept this was a worthwhile career, that a young boy joining the army would be expected to go in one of the famous county regiments or the infantry or the cavalry. It was a very slow start before people saw it as a career in the army to be an Intelligence Corps officer.
And of course now you have women. I mean, they were attached during the Second World War, but not until 1992, wasn't it, that women could officially become part of the Intelligence Corps. So that's quite a groundbreaking moment, isn't it?
Yes, well, the capability of women in the intelligence business is outstanding. I mean, whether it's the SIGINT side or the PI, photographic inside, or the interrogation side. I mean, it was well known that the ladies quite quick at detecting if a guy's bullying, and where the truth comes out. So the number of women who moved into intelligence was considerable, but they were not recognised as Intelligence Corps, although they would wear the Intelligence Corps badge on their breast until the final day when first of all the ATS became the WRAC, and then the WRAC became to the various regiment. And my predecessor as director, he always says he had the first job on the pass-out parade where to pin the officially the Int Corps badge on the ladies. But then they have become an integral part of the Intelligence Corps in all ranks. And I think we have, percentage-wise, significantly more, statistically more, ladies in the Corps than any other corps, I've been told.
And so in your experience, do you think there's a different way that men and women do intelligence? Is there a different kind of mindset between the genders? Is that placing a modern interpretation on something that gathering intelligence is gathering intelligence? Do you think women have a different aspect to bring?
As an opinion, I would say that ladies are more conscientious and detailed. you, if they're looking at an intelligence problem, or particularly in the PI world or the SIGINT side, conscientious to get it right. A very valuable asset. I mean, I would constantly go to I get confused between ladies, girls, and I hate saying female and so on. But if I stick to ladies, I would go to them because you get a clear answer and a brain which sorted problems out. So a great asset. It's a generalization because whether they're ladies or men, but consistently the ladies show an aptitude for this sort of work.
We've spoken about the officers. Were there any soldiers recruited into the Intelligence Corps?
Well, just as it's been a wonderful story for the officers rising up to 4-star, so it has been with the soldiers. As I mentioned, that it was the soldiers' contribution to intelligence in all these theatres was recognised by the DMI as an asset. He was worried about the calibre or the career prospects of the officers, so formed the cadre of the officers. But it was the soldiers who were recruited always into the Corps, and that took development, just as the officers have developed. When I was at the OC Depot time, only 2 soldiers could get a commission. And they had to be RSMs, and the only 2 jobs they could go to were the quartermaster in Germany and the quartermaster in Ashford. Now it's totally changed. There may have been odd exceptions in the PI world, and I'm not sure about SIGINT, but for the bulk of the Corps, that was the only way to get a commission. That is now history. And I think it is part of the change in the social attitude that the Army looks at. The officer class is now much more universal. And many of our senior NCOs, they go to Staff College. I think we've had 2 atop recently of the Staff College course, which is a wonderful experience. They're now full colonels, and they move into the jobs again because they have the expertise and these various specialised functions now. So it's another wonderful story of this young corps.
Careers in the Intelligence Corps, I suppose we wouldn't necessarily call them careers as such because they were very limited, weren't they, in the early days? But that's changed now, hasn't it?
It's been a dramatic, wonderful change. The first 100, the senior guy was a lieutenant colonel, and the majority of staff appointments, particularly the relevant ones, were always posted from out of Camberley for top grade people. They were put into intelligence, not that they had any intelligence background, but it was the perception, with some justification, was a senior intelligence officer got all the other guys to produce the stuff, and then they would analyse it and put it into an operational sequence. Unlike the Americans or the Israelis, who have a command operational type intelligence, we will have this very distinct difference between operational commanders and intelligence commanders. Mm-hmm. And with the complication of post-war, it became more important that the intelligence operators, officers, understood the new capabilities which were now available, and actually could, when making a briefing, an assessment, or setting up the infrastructure in any scenario, knew about PI, knew about SIGINT, knew about source handling, knew about surveillance, knew about analysis and dissemination, and knew about counter-security. All those skills in the modern army required somebody who knew something about them, rather than somebody coming who commanded his battalion and then was put in charge to assimilate all those different disciplines. And so it's been the development of the Corps has been the development of the operational requirements of the British Army, going into all these places, having to set up and cope with a variety of source acquisition means and be able to bring it all together, command it, use all the assets, and then brief from it.
And where we find ourselves today is that General Sir Jim Hockenhull, who was Intelligence Corps, is now head of Defence Intelligence. That's remarkable, isn't it? Isn't he the first?
For me, it's so logical, but it is remarkable. I mean, it's only in the 70s that we got our first brigadier. And that was seen to be a unique stepping stone. And there was a lot of worry about this, that getting a 1-star Int Corps guy, it's been the momentum of the development of acquisition, the intense scrutiny, I think, as well, that in operations now with the BBC and the media, people are aware of mistakes and they want to know what's going on. And therefore intelligence assessments become far more public and relevant. And the beauty, if you've joined the Intelligence Corps, is to be actually posted to a situation where the general is actually listening to you for you to tell him what you think is going to happen. And his brain is saying, does that mean I'm going to deploy, or how am I going to deploy? That's the magic bit of if you're an Intelligence Corps officer.
Well, of course, it was, way back Duke of Marlborough, some 200 and 300 years ago, who said, no successful campaign, I'm paraphrasing, but no successful campaign can be won without intelligence. Intelligence is absolutely crucial. So do you see any moment historically, do you have a favourite moment in history where intelligence has made a real difference?
Well, in my own time, using that rather than historical, because there are other historical ones, but I think if we come right back to Northern Ireland, it was source handling and surveillance. It was a critical factor in Northern Ireland to get to know what was going on. And the relevance, therefore, of that sort of intelligence became so important. And then that moved across into Kosovo and the Balkans and other Operation Afghanistan and Iraq and so on, that the general wanted his intelligence officer to have experience, competence, and tell him the facts. And he didn't want a generalized view of what may go on. He wanted specific intelligence. And it's because of operations. To be an intelligence officer in non-operational scenarios is a dead loss. We have the INT briefing now, and right, but when you're in the operational situation where he wants to know, then it becomes very worthwhile. And because the British Army has been continually engaged in operations in the last 30 years, that's led to the requirement of generals wanting intelligence-trained officers, to this remarkable achievement from one lieutenant colonel when I joined to now a 4-star head of CDS. Totally understandable, logical and correct, says he.
And you've got a passion, haven't you, for keeping the history of the Intelligence Corps alive. In fact, you were the founding father, weren't you, of the museum and the archives for the Intelligence Corps. What was the moment at which you decided that there absolutely should be a museum to this history to keep this alive?
I think it was a sense of humility in a way. I was a major when I came back to the depot, and very proud and conscious of now being in the Intelligence Corps, and then being intrigued and delighted and humbled when you say, hey, all these other guys wore this cap badge. There's no history of that. They were no focal point for them. There's individual stories, but there's no record of what the enormous things they did. And why don't we just, for the recruits and the young officers coming in, show that this cap badge hasn't started in 58. There's guys and girls have worn this cap badge in all these strange situations with such bravery and dedication. So it seemed a logical thing to pull it gradually together.
And of course, that project is now expanding. There's going to be a national centre for military intelligence. Very exciting project. Finally, my question to you is about that. What are your feelings about the new vision and the National Centre for Military Intelligence?
Brilliant. And I like the national feel, because intelligence is a national affair. I mean, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, or no, now the conclusions affect the politicians' decisions, not just the generals' decisions that it used to be on the field, but the Prime Minister and the Cabinet make big political decisions on the credibility of the intelligence. And of course, the other agencies, the civilian agencies, GCHQ and so on, are fundamental in that. But the services can also add a dimension to help make the right decisions. And so just as we started, how wonderful now there's going to be a national centre where people recognise the skills and the attributes of people who've served in this particular skill.
Brigadier Brian Parritt, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today and your life in an intelligence career. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen.
This has been a production for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. To find out more and to support the NCMI, please visit ncmi.co.uk.